Hi there, this is Sue Knight. This is part 3 of my series on coaching with humour, which is based on the work of provocative therapy by Frank Farrelly. In this part, I'm going to talk about a related topic, one that I find it's very helpful to be aware of, and one that you can use in a provocative way. And that topic is the drama triangle, which was introduced by Stephen Karpman and then presented as part of Transactional Analysis by Eric Berne. And the drama triangle describes an unhealthy dynamic in relationships. It's a triangle because there's 3 roles in the triangle: the persecutor, the victim, and the rescuer. And I found it very useful to be aware of these roles, especially when you're in a coaching scenario, and how to be able to avoid them. And I find that particularly with the coaching with humour, it's a way to totally sidestep the possibility of getting drawn in. The risk of getting drawn into any of these roles is that you're in the triangle and you can move around it and find yourself in any of the other roles. So, for example, if somebody presents themselves as a victim to you, and the way in which that can happen is that they present themselves in a helpless state, a learned helpless state, without helpfully or explicitly asking for support or help. So they don't have a clear goal or a clear request related to that. They put out a helpless state. And what that tends to do is attract rescuers. So people think they want help, they'll offer advice, they'll offer support, they offer reassurance. But because it's not been explicitly asked for, those rescuers are trapped in the dynamic. So, for example, someone might say, well, things aren't going very well, or I've got a problem. They're not saying they want help. So a rescuer would be somebody who steps in and says, well, how about this? Have you tried such and such? And what can happen is that they subsequently become the victim when the original victim blames them for what happens next. So they turn on them, they didn't ask for that help, and the intended rescuer finds themselves being the victim instead, being persecuted by the other person. So we move around those roles. And for example, I had a situation on a course last week when I had invited the group to give each other feedback and to do it publicly and to do it in a non-verbal way in part, and it was intended to lighten the whole feedback process, and in most cases people were enjoying it and they were laughing about the whole scenario. One person was very serious, and one person didn't like the feedback that they received, and she said that was very uncomfortable. I don't see myself like that. Now, almost immediately, what some of the other people in the group did was to go, oh, well, maybe you're not like that. You're really fine and you do it this way. So they stepped in to reassure her, to readdress the feedback that had been given. And in so doing, they were stepping into the role of rescuer. Now, the risk of this is that they are avoiding the opportunity for learning. Because with the coaching with humour approach, what we're looking for are those areas of vulnerability, the areas where somebody becomes defensive, where they kind of hedge, they avoid a situation. That's where the learning lies. So if you rescue somebody from those positions, you're not necessarily doing them any favours. So we addressed that, we talked about that process. That's a good example, and it happens so very easily. And most of those people who were stepping in, attempting to do the rescuing, were people who were experienced coaches, they are trainers. So being able to recognise the roles, as I say, to rescue, to recognise a victim, is to recognise that somebody is incongruently putting out a plea for help. A rescuer is somebody who's stepping in when they've not been explicitly asked. I know I tended to drop into that role a lot when I first learned NLP. I just wanted to use my skills on the world, so I thought, asked or otherwise. And a persecutor is somebody who's blaming particularly circumstances and people outside of themselves. Well, it's like this other person or it's the world, or it's the economy, or it's the situation, it's the context that's made me feel like this. So the danger of getting into any of those roles is that you move around the other ones. Now, the beauty of coaching with humour is that you can use those roles, but use them provocatively. So you can caricature the roles as a way of raising awareness. So, for example, if somebody is taking a helpless stance, you can play the devil's advocate and push them further in that direction. So if someone says, oh, well, I'll never be able to do such and such, or I'm really not succeeding. Well, rather than reassure with a signal that you're being provocative, you could agree with them and say, well, probably not. I mean, for example, how old are you? Well, people of this age probably are not going to get it. You haven't got much, let's face it. How much time do you think you've got left? So using that issue of age and death, you can provocatively bring them face to face with the consequence of what they're doing. And the same with the other roles as well. So, for example, you can provocatively be the rescuer and give crazy suggestions. So I remember one lady who came for a session with Frank, and it was with a group, so we were able to watch this coaching session. And almost as soon as she sat in the chair with Frank, she was in tears, and she said, this is the issue. I'm so often inappropriately emotional. And so his response was to say, well, have you ever thought of taking up being a professional funeral mourner? So you could walk along with the coffin, you could work for the funeral director, and you could go with the coffin and with the families and cry. And they'd so appreciate that this organisation was being so sympathetic and so associated with the death of their family member, for example. So he provocatively took the rescuer role, but in a ridiculous way. And she started to laugh. And from that point, she stepped out of that distressed place, that emotional place. And it's not always appropriate to step out of emotional places, but this has become a habit. And she had started to laugh at herself. And that's very significant, that whole expression of laughing at yourself. Because most often we get stuck because we are emotionally caught up in issues. And the expression and the whole experience of laughing at yourself means that you dissociated, you stepped back, you can see and hear yourself as if you're an outsider. And so you've created that distance where you can take a perspective. So it's a great skill to be able to laugh at yourself. And this is what the coaching with humour approach encourages. And just to say a bit about the provocative persecutor role, you blame others. And so, for example, if somebody says they've got an issue with their partner, it could be, well, what do you expect? That's men for you. They're all like that. I have had a few gasps of, sexist comment when I've said that when I've been doing talks. But it's done to raise awareness. If you do the very thing that the person has been doing to themselves, i.e. generalise and blame, and you do it, you've taken it out of their realm. It's no longer there for them to do it in quite the same way. So what do? They now have to find another way of approaching their thinking about this. And anything is better than the way that they've been doing. And more than anything, what you're doing is raising their awareness by showing them, by mirroring back what they're doing in this humorous and loving and caring and awareness-raising way. So I'll be introducing some other related topics and how they connect with coaching with humour. But that's just something to think about, and maybe be aware today of whether you're taking on any of those roles and whether you notice them in anybody else. I look forward to talking to you in the next part.